Hey guys, tonight we're checking into the most glamorous, gilded and secretly ridiculous world money could buy. The grand American hotel of the 1920s. Marble lobbies, palm courts, bellhops in little round hats, and enough crystal chandeliers to blind a small nation. It looks like pure luxury, and in many ways it was. But underneath all the velvet and the jazz, staying in one of these palaces came with its own strange rituals, awkward etiquette, and a whole lot of people whose entire job was to watch you eat soup. A big and sincere thank you to the listener who suggested tonight's topic. Your ideas genuinely shape what happens here, and this channel only grows because of the quiet suggestions you leave in the comments. So if you enjoy these late-night journeys, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. And leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you, because somehow it's always 2 a.m. somewhere. If you'd rather drift off with just your ears, the channel is now on Spotify as well, and you can find the link down in the description. Now dim the lights, switch on a fan for that soft background hum, fluff your very modern pillow, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. But first, let's wonder about a few things. Did people really dress up just to ride an elevator? Was there actually a man whose entire career was opening a single door? Where did all the alcohol go the moment Prohibition arrived? And where did it secretly reappear about 20 minutes later? Could you survive an entire dinner without using the wrong fork and being silently judged by a waiter older than your grandfather? And what happened if you tried to check in looking like you just stepped off a long, dusty train, which you absolutely had? Well, you're about to find out. Congratulations. You've just arrived at a grand hotel in the year 1925, wearing your best travelling clothes, clutching a heavy leather suitcase, and about to be gently, expensively fussed over by more staff than you knew existed. Welcome to luxury. Try not to embarrass yourself. Your automobile, or more likely your hired taxi, rolls to a stop beneath an enormous glass and iron canopy, and before you can even reach for the door handle, someone else has already opened it for you. This is the doorman, a towering figure in a long coat with more gold braid than a naval admiral, and his entire purpose is to make your arrival feel like an event. He greets you, signals for a bellhop with a small nod, and somehow manages to make you feel both extremely important and slightly underdressed at the same time. You have not even stepped inside yet, and already the fussing has begun. Take a proper look at this man, because he is a professional in a way you might not expect. He stands at his post for hours in all weather, in blistering summer heat and freezing winter wind, greeting every single arrival as though they are the most distinguished guest of the entire day. He remembers faces. He remembers names. He remembers with alarming precision exactly who tipped well last time and who pretended to be fumbling for change until the moment passed. In a strange way, he is the memory of the building, standing guard at the front door. His uniform is doing a great deal of heavy lifting. The long coat, the polished buttons, the cap with its stiff brim, all of it is designed to signal that you have arrived somewhere serious, somewhere expensive, somewhere that takes itself very seriously indeed. It is the 1920s equivalent of a glowing logo above a lobby, except the logo is a living human being who can also hail you a cab and comment politely on the weather. Now, about that weather and that cab. Part of the doorman's job was managing the small chaos of the curb. A steady parade of taxis, private cars and delivery vehicles all trying to occupy the same stretch of pavement at once. He directs traffic with the confidence of a man conducting an orchestra, waving one vehicle forward, holding another back and somehow keeping the whole thing from collapsing into a shouting match. Think of him as the original valet, minus the little podium and the ticket you inevitably lose. Then there is your luggage, which in this era is no small matter. You're not travelling with a tidy carry-on and a backpack. You have a steamer trunk the size of a small wardrobe, several hat boxes, and a leather suitcase heavy enough to be classified as a weapon. The doorman does not carry these himself, of course. That would be beneath his station. Instead, he summons the bellhop with a practiced gesture, and your mountain of belongings is whisked away before you have fully processed that it has left your hands. And here is the quiet social test hiding inside this whole warm welcome. Somewhere in the next few seconds, you're expected to acknowledge his effort with a small tip, discreetly folded and smoothly passed, as though money is a slightly embarrassing thing that happens to fall out of your hand near his. Do it too obviously, and you look green. Do it too little, and you have made an enemy at the one door you must walk through every single day of your stay. Ever tried to make a good first impression while doing complicated math about coins? Welcome to arrival. So you smile, you nod, you press something into his palm and he tips his cap as if you have done him a tremendous honour. The doors part before you. You have officially been welcomed, and you have not yet spent one single minute inside. Then you walk through the doors, and the lobby hits you like a warm wave. Marble floors stretch out in every direction, polished to a shine so bright you could probably shave in them. Chandeliers drip from ceilings 3 stories overhead. Potted palms sway beside deep velvet armchairs. And somewhere a fountain trickles purely to remind you that this place has money to waste on trickling. People murmur, newspapers rustle, and a faint smell of cigars, fresh flowers, and floor polish hangs in the air. It is less a room and more a performance, and you have just wandered onto the stage. Let your eyes travel upward, because that is exactly what the architects wanted. These ceilings were built tall on purpose, soaring far higher than any room reasonably needs to be, because nothing says wealth quite like paying to heat and light an enormous volume of empty air above everyone's heads. Gilded mouldings edge the ceiling, painted murals sometimes stretch across it, and the whole effect is designed to make you feel small in the most flattering way possible. It is the 1920s version of a cathedral, except the thing being worshipped is money. Now look at the people, because the lobby is really a stage for them. Society matrons in fur-trimmed coats drift past like slow-moving ocean liners. Businessmen in sharp suits cluster near the columns, striking deals in low voices. A young couple whispers on a settee, pretending not to be nervous about the bill. Everyone is performing just a little, aware that they are being seen, which is precisely why the armchairs are arranged for maximum visibility. People did not simply sit in a grand lobby, they held court in it. The palms deserve a mention of their own. Grand hotels adored their potted palms and ferns, arranging them into miniature indoor jungles that lent the space a lush, exotic, faintly tropical air. Some hotels even built entire glass-roofed courts around them, called palm courts, where an orchestra might play softly in the afternoon while guests sipped tea. It was greenery as pure decoration, a way of saying we have so much room and so much money that we grow trees indoors for fun. Underfoot the marble is doing its part. Cool, hard, and immaculately polished, it announces every footstep with a crisp little click, which is why you can hear the whole room moving around you like a gentle percussion section. It also means one spilled drink turns the floor into an ice rink, and somewhere a member of staff is always quietly watching for exactly that. All that shine came at the cost of a small army of people buffing it back to a mirror finish every single night. And then there is the sound, or rather the particular hush of it. A grand lobby is never truly silent, but it is disciplined. Voices stay low, laughter stays polite. The loudest thing in the room is often that decorative fountain, trickling away with the smug confidence of water that knows it exists purely to be pleasant. It is background noise engineered for calm, the ancestor of every soft instrumental track ever piped through a modern hotel. The whole space has one job, and it does it brilliantly, to make you feel for a moment that you have stepped out of your ordinary life and into something finer. Whether you're a millionaire or a travelling salesman who saved for months, the lobby treats you to the same dazzling first impression. It is generous like that, at least until you reach the front desk, where the generosity gets a good deal more selective. It's time to actually announce yourself, which means approaching the front desk, a long polished counter guarded by a room clerk with immaculate hair and the calm authority of a man who has seen every kind of guest imaginable. You sign the register, a giant leather-bound book where your name joins a long list of travellers, salesmen, honeymooners, and the occasional celebrity. He glances at your luggage, quietly forms an opinion about you that he will never say aloud, and slides a heavy brass key across the counter. Congratulations, you now have a room and a permanent audience. The room clerk is a very particular kind of professional. Smooth, unflappable, and impossibly polite. He has mastered the art of being warmly courteous while sizing you up completely. In one glance he takes in your clothing, your luggage, your accent, and your general air of belonging or not belonging. And from all of that he makes a rapid, silent judgment about exactly what sort of guest you're going to be. He would never say so. He does not need to. It is written in which room he assigns you. That register you sign is more than a formality. It is a record, a status symbol, and a source of endless gossip all at once. Curious guests and sharp-eyed reporters would sometimes crane their necks to see who else was staying, hoping to spot a famous name or a scandalous pairing. Signing the book was a small ceremony, your official entry into the temporary society of the hotel. It also meant that, from this moment forward, the establishment knew precisely who you were, which was reassuring and slightly unnerving in equal measure. Then comes the key, and it is nothing like the flimsy plastic card you tap today. This is a substantial brass key, often attached to a weighty tag or fob deliberately made large and heavy, so that you would think twice about walking off with it in your pocket. You did not carry your key around town. You handed it back to the desk on your way out and collected it again on your return, which meant the front desk always knew, more or less, whether you were in the building. It was security, key management, and gentle surveillance rolled into one heavy piece of metal. The clerk himself is standing at the centre of an entire information network. He knows who has arrived and who has departed. He knows which guests are expecting visitors and which visitors are decidedly not expected. He fields questions about train times, theatre tickets, restaurant recommendations, and the weather, all delivered with the same unbothered calm. He is the search engine of the 1920s, except he judges you silently and remembers everything. Behind the polished surface there is a quiet hierarchy at work. A well-dressed regular with a trunk full of fine luggage might glide through check-in and float up to a suite with a view. A road-weary traveller in a rumpled coat might find himself politely directed to a smaller room near the elevator shaft, the one that rattles all night. Nothing rude is ever said. The system simply sorts you, gently and firmly, into your place. Ever felt a maitre d' decide your entire evening in half a second? This is his cousin. So you take your enormous brass key, offer your thanks, and turn toward the elevators feeling both welcomed and quietly assessed. You have a room, you have a number, you've joined the temporary population of a small, glittering, tightly run kingdom, and the very next member of its staff is already waiting to carry your bags, because in a place like this, you're never allowed to be alone with your own luggage for long. Before you can even lift your own suitcase, a young man in a snug little uniform and a round pillbox hat has already scooped it up. This is the bellhop, and he is fast, polite, and extremely aware of exactly how large your tip might be. He guides you toward the elevator, carrying your bags as though they weigh nothing, chatting just enough to be friendly, but never enough to be annoying. In an age long before wheels on suitcases, his back is doing genuinely heroic work, and he does it all while smiling as if your comfort is the only thing that matters in the entire world. Consider that luggage for a moment, because it deserves your sympathy on his behalf. This is the era of the steamer trunk, a great wooden and leather beast built to survive ocean crossings and long train journeys, packed with everything a well-dressed traveller might need for weeks away from home. Add the suitcases, the hat boxes and the odd golf bag, and the bellhop is essentially hauling a small household across a marble floor. There are no wheels, there is no clever handle, there is only him, a luggage cart if he is lucky, and the sturdy determination of youth. The pillbox hat and trim jacket are not an accident. The bellhop was meant to look crisp, eager, and unmistakably part of the hotel, a friendly splash of uniform darting through the grand spaces like a well-trained sparrow. The look was so distinctive that it became a symbol in its own right. The cheerful young man in the little round hat calling out for a guest across the lobby. It is an image so iconic that people still picture it today, long after the job itself largely faded away. His usefulness does not end at carrying bags. A good bellhop was a walking guidebook, a fixer, and a discreet problem solver all in one. Need to know where to find a decent meal, a barber, a theatre, or a quiet card game? Ask the bellhop. Need something delivered, fetched, or quietly arranged with no questions asked? The bellhop again. During Prohibition, this last talent took on a particularly interesting flavour, but we will get to that thirsty subject a little later. The relationship between you and the bellhop runs entirely on a delicate economy of tips. Every bag carried, every errand run, every helpful suggestion offered comes with the quiet understanding that a small coin should follow. He never asks. He simply lingers, ever so slightly, in that practiced pause that says the moment has arrived. It is the same subtle hover you feel today when a helpful stranger has clearly done you a favour and is now waiting to see whether you noticed. He noticed. He always notices. For the young men who took these jobs, it was hard, physical, endless work, but it could also be surprisingly good. A busy bellhop at a busy hotel, especially one who was quick, charming and well-liked, could earn far more in tips than his official wage suggested. He learned to read people instantly, to anticipate needs before they were spoken, and to keep an entire mental map of who was staying where and who wanted what. It was a hustle, and the best of them were very good at it. So he leads you across the lobby, your enormous burden balanced with unreasonable ease, chatting lightly about your journey, while steering you exactly where you need to go. You feel looked after, you feel important, and you have quietly agreed, without a single word, to a running tab of gratitude that will follow you all the way to the elevator, where yet another smiling stranger is waiting to take over your care. You step into the elevator, and here you meet yet another person whose whole profession might surprise you, the elevator operator. Perched on a little stool beside a polished brass lever, he greets you warmly, asks for your floor, and then guides the car upward with the practiced touch of a man who does this several 100 times a day. There are no buttons to press, no glowing numbers to poke at. You simply stand there in your finest clothes, making pleasant small talk, while a total stranger gently transports you vertically through a very expensive building. The machine he operates is genuinely tricky to drive, which is exactly why it needs him. Early elevators did not simply glide to a floor and stop themselves. The operator had to ease the car to a halt by hand, judging the movement so that the elevator floor lined up neatly with the hallway floor. Do it well, and you step out smoothly without a second thought. Do it badly, and you get a little jolt, a mismatched step, and the mild indignity of stumbling out of an elevator in front of strangers. A skilled operator made it look effortless, which is the surest sign that it was not. He is also, whether he intends to be or not, a keeper of secrets. All day long he ferries guests up and down, overhearing conversations, noticing who is going to whose floor, and observing the little dramas of the building unfold in the space of a short ride. He says nothing, of course. Discretion is half the job. But if the walls of a grand hotel could talk, the elevator operator would be the one they quoted, because he heard most of it first, standing quietly by his brass lever with a pleasant, unreadable expression. The confined space makes for a peculiar kind of social ritual. You're trapped in a small, elegant box with a stranger for anywhere from a few seconds to a minute, and etiquette demands a certain polite exchange, a comment on the weather, a remark about the crowd in the lobby, a wish for a pleasant evening. It is the awkward small talk of the modern elevator, except back then there was a professional standing right there to help carry the conversation, which honestly might have been an improvement. His uniform, like everyone else's, is part of the show. Neatly pressed, often with white gloves, he was meant to look sharp and reassuring, a calm presence in charge of a slightly alarming machine. For many guests, especially those who'd grown up in a world of stairs, the elevator itself was still a small marvel, a smooth mechanical ascent through the heart of a towering building. Having a poised attendant at the controls made the whole experience feel less like riding a contraption, and more like being personally lifted toward luxury. There is a gentle absurdity to it all when you stop and think about it. An entire human career, built around the task of moving people up and down inside a building. It sounds almost quaint now, in a world where you jab a glowing button and ride alone in silence, avoiding eye contact with your own reflection. But in the 1920s, this was service, and service meant that a real person handled the thing so that you never had to. Even going upstairs was something done for you, so he eases the car to a smooth stop, slides the gate open with a flourish, and announces your floor as though it were a small destination worth celebrating. You step out onto plush carpet, the bellhop right behind you with your bags, and the operator tips his head before descending to collect his next passenger. Your room is close now, and somehow you still have not carried a single thing yourself. The door swings open, and there it is, your room, or if you're feeling especially flush, your suite. Heavy drapes frame tall windows, a plush bed sits against the far wall, and the furniture is solid, dark, and clearly built to outlive you by several decades. There might be a writing desk stocked with crisp hotel stationery, a comfortable armchair, and a pair of electric lamps just waiting to impress you. Everything smells faintly of clean linen and furniture wax. The bellhop shows you around, points out a few features, and then hovers ever so slightly, because this is the precise moment you're expected to tip him. Let's talk about that furniture, because it is nothing like the flat-packed, lightly assembled pieces you know today. This is heavy, serious stuff, built from real wood and meant to survive decades of guests treating it exactly as carelessly as guests always do. The wardrobe is enormous, because your steamer trunk needs somewhere to unpack into. The bed frame is sturdy enough to anchor a ship. Everything has weight, permanence, and the quiet confidence of an object that expects to be there long after you've checked out and been forgotten. The writing desk deserves special affection. Stocked with the hotel's own stationery, its name printed proudly across the top, it invited you to write letters home and casually mention exactly where you were staying. It was free advertising disguised as a courtesy, and it worked beautifully. There is something charming about an age when the height of luxury communication was a fine sheet of paper, a good pen, and the certainty that your letter would take several days to arrive and nobody minded at all. Look closer, and you will find the little touches that separated a grand hotel from a mere place to sleep. Fresh flowers in a vase, a bowl of fruit for the more expensive rooms, thick curtains that actually blocked the light, a genuine luxury in a noisy, bright city. A telephone on the desk, a marvel we will marvel at properly in a moment. Each small detail was designed to make you feel cared for, as though the hotel had been expecting you specifically and had gone to some trouble on your behalf. Then there is the view, which was very much part of the price. A room facing the avenue, the park or the harbour, cost a good deal more than one staring at a brick wall or humming quietly beside the elevator shaft. The clerk downstairs decided which you got, remember, based on that swift, silent judgment at the desk. So if you find yourself gazing out over the glittering city, congratulations, you passed the test. If you're looking at the air shaft, well, at least the bed is comfortable and the wall has never once judged you back. And now, the bellhop. He has carried your mountain of luggage all this way, shown you the light switches, demonstrated how the window opens, and pointed out the location of the bathroom as though it were a hidden treasure, which in this era it very nearly was. He has done his job admirably. And so he lingers, in that familiar practiced pause, waiting for the small coin that acknowledges his effort. You oblige. He beams, wishes you a splendid stay, and finally mercifully leaves you alone. The door clicks shut, and for the first time since your taxi pulled up, there is silence and privacy. The room is yours. The city hums beyond the glass. You sink into the armchair, or perhaps test the bed with an experimental bounce, and feel the full weight of the luxury settle around you. Then your eye drifts toward a door in the corner, the one that leads to the single most impressive feature of the entire suite, and you rise to investigate. Let's talk about the true luxury of the era, the one that would have stopped your grandparents in their tracks. A private bathroom, all to yourself. No shared privy down the hall, no quiet battles with the neighbours over the tub. Instead, you get gleaming white porcelain, shining chrome taps, and hot running water that arrives on demand as though summoned by magic. There is a deep bathtub, thick towels, and little bars of soap wrapped just for you. For a great many travellers in the 1920s, this was the single most impressive thing about the whole hotel, and honestly, it's very easy to see why. To appreciate this properly, you have to remember what most people were coming from. In countless homes and cheaper boarding houses of the era, the bathroom was a shared affair, a single facility for an entire floor of strangers, or worse, an outhouse in the yard. Bathing was an event that required planning, hauling, and heating. So to walk into a hotel room and find your own private tub, your own basin, and hot water that appeared the instant you turned a tap was not a minor convenience. It was a genuine glimpse of the future, tiled in white porcelain. That hot water is the real miracle here. Somewhere far below you, great boilers and pipes were working constantly to deliver warmth to hundreds of rooms at once, so that any guest, on any floor, at nearly any hour, could summon a hot bath without lifting a bucket or lighting a fire. You simply turned the tap, watched the steam rise and lowered yourself into water heated by an invisible system you never had to think about. It is the sort of thing we now grumble about the moment it runs even slightly cold. The bathtub itself was often a thing of beauty, a deep cast-iron tub coated in gleaming enamel, sometimes standing proudly on little clawed feet. It was made for genuine soaking, for lying back and letting the heat work its way into bones weary from long train journeys and longer days of being fussed over. Beside it sat towels thick enough to lose a hand in, folded with military precision by staff whose job was to ensure that even drying yourself felt indulgent. Ever tried to dry off with a thin, sad, overwashed towel? The 1920s Grand Hotel would not stand for such cruelty. Then there were the small courtesies, the little wrapped bars of soap set out just for you, replaced fresh for every guest. It seems a tiny thing, but it carried a quiet message. This has been prepared for you, and only you, and no one else has touched it. In a world where so much was shared and reused, that small sealed bar of soap was a private luxury, the ancestor of every little bottle of shampoo you've ever quietly slipped into your bag on the way out. Of course, the plumbing was not always perfect. Pipes could knock and groan, water could run rusty for a moment before clearing, and the pressure might sputter if half the building decided to bathe at once. The technology was new enough that its occasional hiccups were forgiven with a shrug. Guests were simply too delighted to have any of it at all to complain much about the details. When the alternative is a bucket and a prayer, a slightly noisy pipe is a small price to pay. So you fill the tub, let the steam curl up toward the ceiling, and sink into hot water summoned from thin air, feeling like the most fortunate person in the entire city. It is comfort as spectacle, plumbing as luxury, and a private little kingdom of porcelain steam. And when you finally emerge, pink and gloriously relaxed, you reach for the wall to flip on a light, only to be quietly amazed all over again. You reach for the wall, flip a small switch, and the room floods with electric light. No matches, no oil, no smoke, no fuss. No, in the 1920s this still felt like a minor miracle to plenty of guests, especially those who had grown up squinting by candlelight and hissing gas lamps. Bulbs glowed in the lamps, in the ceiling fixtures, and sometimes even inside the closet, as if the hotel were quietly showing off. You can read in bed, find your shoes at midnight, and flick the world on and off at will. It is the kind of everyday power we now completely take for granted. To understand the wonder of it, picture the alternative that many guests remembered vividly. Gas lamps that hissed and flickered, gave off heat and fumes, and had an unsettling habit of catching curtains on fire if left too close. Candles that dripped, guttered, and plunged you into darkness the moment a draught found them. Oil lamps that needed trimming, filling, and careful tending. Light, for most of human history, had been a fiddly, smelly, faintly dangerous chore. And now, suddenly, it was a switch on the wall. Grand hotels leaned into this new magic with enthusiasm bordering on showing off. Electric light was scattered generously throughout the building, in the grand public rooms, in the hallways, and right into your private space. Some hotels made a point of blazing with light after dark, their windows glowing warmly out over the city as a kind of advertisement. "Look at us," the illuminated facade seemed to say. "We are modern, we're electric, and we are absolutely not going to make you carry a candle to bed." The controls themselves were part of the delight. A switch beside the door meant you could light the whole room before stepping into it, banishing the dark before it could unsettle you. A lamp beside the bed meant you could read late into the night, and then extinguish the light without getting up. A small pleasure that had genuinely not been possible for most people a generation earlier. It sounds absurd to marvel at a light switch, but marvel they did because it replaced an entire era of fumbling in the dark. There were quirks, naturally, because the technology was still young. Wiring was not always reliable, bulbs burned out with a sudden little pop, and the light itself could be dimmer and warmer than the bright glow we expect today. Some fixtures buzzed faintly, some flickered when the building's demand surged, but these were the small growing pains of a revolution, and nobody who had spent their childhood squinting at a candle was going to complain about a bulb that occasionally hummed. There was also a certain theatre to electric light that the hotels understood perfectly. A chandelier ablaze with dozens of bulbs turned a ballroom into a jewel box. Softly lit lamps in a lounge created an atmosphere of hushed elegance. Light became a design tool, a way of shaping mood and space, rather than merely a means of not tripping over the furniture. The Grand Hotel was, in a sense, one of the first places ordinary travellers experienced light being used deliberately for beauty. So you stand in your softly glowing room, flicking the switch on and off once or twice just to enjoy the sheer, effortless power of it, feeling briefly like a wizard who has mastered the sun. It is a small, silly pleasure, and it is entirely genuine. Then, from the desk comes a polite little ring, and you turn toward another modern marvel sitting there waiting for you. One that connects your quiet room to a vast humming network of voices somewhere deep within the building. On the desk or bedside table sits a marvel all its own. A telephone, and not just any telephone, but one connected to a small army of operators buried somewhere deep inside the building. You lift the receiver, and a polite voice asks how she may connect you. Want to reach the front desk, another room, or someone clear across the city? She will handle all of it. Behind the scenes, rows of switchboard operators sit at enormous boards, plugging and unplugging cords at dizzying speed, quietly listening to the pulse of the entire hotel hum through their headsets. The telephone in your room was, by itself, a status symbol. Plenty of private homes still had no telephone at all, so to have one sitting right there on the nightstand, ready to connect you to the world at a moment's notice, was a real luxury. You did not dial a number in the way you might imagine. You lifted the receiver, waited for the operator, and told her what you wanted, and she made it happen. The machine on your desk was really just a doorway to a person whose entire job was to connect you to other people. Those people were the switchboard operators, and they were the beating heart of the hotel's nervous system. Seated at towering boards studded with sockets and blinking lights, they handled a relentless stream of calls, routing each one by hand with a quick, practiced motion of the cords. It was fast, demanding work that required a good memory, a steady hand, and unshakable patience, since guests were not always at their most gracious when they wanted a call put through immediately. It was multitasking of an intensity that would make a modern juggler weep. The role was almost entirely filled by young women, prized for their courteous voices and quick fingers, and they became the invisible hostesses of the whole operation. They spoke to everyone yet were seen by almost no one, a disembodied voice of calm efficiency threading through the building. They knew by necessity an enormous amount about the daily rhythms of the hotel, who called whom, at what hour, and how often. Like the elevator operator, they heard a great deal and were expected to repeat none of it. The system also connected the hotel to itself in wonderfully convenient ways. From the comfort of your room, you could ring the front desk with a question, summon room service for a late supper, ask to be woken at a certain hour, or leave a message for another guest. Need an early call before catching a train? The operator noted it and made sure a voice roused you at dawn. It was concierge service, alarm clock and messaging system, all funneled through a single polite conversation. Of course, this all came with a delicate lack of privacy that guests simply accepted. Since a human being physically connected every call, there was always, in theory, someone at the other end of the line who could hear the moment a conversation began. Discretion was drilled into operators as a professional necessity, and the good ones treated what they overheard as sacred. Still, there is something quietly amusing about an era when your most private phone call passed, however briefly, through the hands of a stranger in a headset. So you place your call, murmur your request to the courteous voice on the line, and moments later find yourself connected exactly where you wish to be, all without leaving your armchair. It feels effortless, almost magical, this instant reach across the building and the city. Somewhere below, a young woman slides a cord into a socket and moves on to the next of 100 calls. And should you decide the room has grown a touch chilly, there's yet another quiet marvel clanking away beneath your window, ready to warm you. Somewhere beneath your window, a metal radiator clanks, hisses, and occasionally sounds like a tiny ghost trying to escape a kettle. This is central heating, another wonder of the modern hotel, pumping warmth through the whole building from a great boiler far below. No chopping wood, no tending a fire, no waking up to frost on the inside of the glass. You simply exist in comfortable warmth, courtesy of pipes you will never see and men in the basement you will never meet. The only real downside is the noise, because these radiators prefer to announce their hard work rather loudly. Once again, the wonder makes sense only when you remember the alternative. Heating a home in colder months traditionally meant fireplaces or stoves, which in turn meant hauling wood or coal, lighting fires, tending them, and cleaning up the ash and soot afterward. It meant rooms that were warm near the flames and freezing everywhere else, and mornings that began with the grim task of coaxing a cold hearth back to life. Central heating swept all of that away, replacing it with warmth that simply existed quietly and continuously, whether you thought about it or not. Deep in the basement, the source of all this comfort laboured around the clock. Enormous boilers heated water or produced steam, which then travelled up through a hidden network of pipes to the radiators in every room. A whole crew of engineers and stokers kept the system fed and running, shoveling coal and monitoring pressure so that hundreds of guests upstairs could stay cosy without the faintest idea of the effort involved. You lounged in your warm room. They sweated beside the furnace. Such was the quiet arrangement of the Grand Hotel. The radiator in your room was the visible end of this invisible machine, a solid ridged lump of iron beneath the window, warm to the touch and faithful in its duty. It was genuinely wonderful, radiating steady heat without smoke, flame, or fuss. It was also, memorably, loud. Steam heating systems were famous for their symphony of clanks, knocks, hisses, and the occasional dramatic bang as steam moved through the pipes. First-time guests often lay awake convinced something was terribly wrong, only to learn it was simply the building keeping them warm and being noisy about it. There was an art to living with these radiators. Sit too close, and you might roast one side of yourself while the window leaked a cold draught onto the other. Drape a damp coat over one and you could dry it by morning, along with filling the room with a faint aroma of warm, wet wool. They were forgiving companions in winter, generous with their heat, if a touch temperamental in how evenly they shared it. Ever fought with a thermostat that only knows two settings, tropical and arctic? These were its clanking grandparents. The system also freed guests from the seasonal misery that shaped so much of ordinary life. Winter, which for centuries had meant a daily battle against the cold, became something you watched through the glass from a warm chair. The frost stayed outside. The chill stayed outside. Inside, you existed in a bubble of engineered comfort, sipping something warm, entirely insulated from the weather that would have tormented your ancestors. It was one more way the Grand Hotel quietly announced that here, the modern world had won. So you settled deeper into your warm room, the radiator ticking and hissing its steady lullaby beneath the window, the cold city glittering harmlessly beyond the glass. Between the hot bath, the electric light, the telephone, and now the effortless heat, you are surrounded by comforts that would have astonished nearly everyone who came before you. You are, in every practical sense, living in the future, and the future, it turns out, still expects you to dress properly for dinner, which is a challenge waiting just around the corner. When evening arrives, you may return to find your bed quietly transformed. The covers have been folded neatly back, the pillows plumped, the curtains drawn, and perhaps a small something left waiting on the nightstand. This is turned-down service, performed by staff who slip in and out while you're at dinner, leaving your room somehow more comfortable than you left it. The sheets are crisp, the blankets heavy, and the whole arrangement is designed to gently insist that you relax. Someone, somewhere, has decided that even the simple act of going to sleep should feel like an occasion. The magic of it lies in the timing. You leave your room in the early evening, a slightly rumpled space with a day's clutter scattered about, and you return a few hours later to find it reset, tidied and prepared for the night. It is done invisibly, in the gap while you're downstairs, so that the transformation feels almost ghostly. No one wants to watch the trick being performed. You simply want to walk in and discover that the fairies have visited, which, in a manner of speaking, they have. Only the fairies wear aprons and are paid by the hour. Behind that quiet magic was a chambermaid, one of the hardest working members of the entire staff. Her day was a long march through room after room, making beds, replacing towels, dusting, sweeping, and setting everything back to a state of flawless order. The turn-down was the evening flourish on top of all that labour, a final gentle touch to send you off to sleep in comfort. It is worth remembering, as you sink into those crisp sheets, that their crispness represents a great deal of someone else's effort. The details were designed to soothe. Folding back the covers meant you did not have to fuss with wrestling the blankets before bed. Plumping the pillows made them look inviting rather than flattened. Drawing the curtains sealed the room into a cosy private cocoon against the glittering, noisy city outside. Each small gesture removed one tiny friction from the act of going to sleep, so that the whole process felt effortless. Ever collapsed into a hotel bed that someone else prepared and felt an irrational surge of gratitude. This is the ritual that invented that feeling. The linens themselves were a point of pride. A grand hotel prided itself on bright white sheets, changed regularly, laundered until they were smooth and fresh. In an age when doing laundry at home was a genuine ordeal of boiling, scrubbing, wringing and hanging, sliding into clean pressed sheets you did not have to wash yourself was a small daily luxury. The heavy blankets and thick coverlets promised warmth, and the whole ensemble whispered a single reassuring message. Rest now. Everything has been handled. There is a quiet psychology to the whole performance, and the hotels understood it perfectly. A prepared bed does not merely offer comfort, it offers permission. It tells you the day is over, that nothing more is required of you, that you may finally set down the effort of being a traveller and simply sleep. In a life full of chores and obligations, having someone remove even the tiny task of turning down your own covers felt like being briefly, gently cared for, the way one might care for an honoured guest or a very tired child. So you slip beneath the folded covers, sink into the plumped pillows, and let the drawn curtains hold the world at bay. It is comfort designed by professionals and delivered without a sound. And should hunger strike before sleep takes you, you need not even leave this cocoon, because a single ring of the telephone can summon a full meal directly to your door. Feeling too grand to bother going downstairs? Simply ring the telephone and before long a waiter appears at your door pushing a wheeled cart draped in white linen. Beneath gleaming silver domes sits your meal, arranged as neatly as if you were seated in the finest dining room in the city. Room service in a 1920s grand hotel was a genuine flex, letting you enjoy a full dinner in your dressing gown while the rest of the world stayed properly buttoned up. The waiter sets everything out, wishes you a pleasant evening, and leaves you alone with more forks than any one person could ever truly require. The whole arrangement was a small miracle of coordination. You picked up the receiver, told the operator or the desk what you desired, and somewhere below, in a vast bustling kitchen, your request joined the flow of orders being prepared. A cook plated your food, a waiter arranged it, and the whole thing was rolled onto an elevator and delivered to your door while still hot. That it arrived warm, complete, and elegantly presented several floors up from where it was made was a logistical feat you were never meant to notice. The cart itself was a clever piece of theatre. Draped in crisp white cloth, topped with those domed silver covers that kept the plates warm and hid the food until the grand reveal, it turned a simple delivery into a small ceremony. The waiter would wheel it in, position it just so, and lift the domes with a practiced flourish, unveiling your meal as though it were a work of art. It is the same little drama that still makes room service feel indulgent today, only performed with far more starch and considerably more silverware. The appeal was never really about the food alone. It was about the privacy and the ease. You could dine without dressing for the occasion, without descending into the crowded dining room, without making conversation with strangers or being sized up by a maitre d'. For the shy, the weary, the newly arrived, or the simply antisocial, room service was a blessing. It let you enjoy the full luxury of fine dining while wrapped in a robe and answerable to no one. Ever eaten an expensive meal in your pyjamas and felt like royalty? The 1920s invented that particular pleasure. It also carried an unmistakable air of privilege. Having food brought to you, rather than going to fetch it yourself, has always signalled status, and doing so in a grand hotel was status of a very refined sort. Honeymooners hid away with private suppers. Businessmen worked through their meals without breaking stride. The genuinely famous used it to eat without being gawked at. Whatever your reason, summoning a meal by telephone announced quietly that you were the sort of person for whom the world came to your door. Naturally, all of this comfort arrived with a bill and a tip, and the same delicate economy of gratitude that followed you everywhere in this building. The waiter who wheeled in your feast had carried it carefully up several floors and arranged it with care, and he lingered ever so slightly in that now familiar pause. You obliged, of course. By this point in your stay, tipping had become as automatic as breathing, a small coin exchanged for nearly every kindness the hotel performed on your behalf. So you settle in to eat, alone and unbothered, the city humming beyond the curtains and a proper dinner steaming under your nose. It is quiet, it is comfortable, and it is gloriously lazy. And as you sip your water, you notice something small and telling about the glass in your hand, something the hotel is oddly proud of, something that says a great deal about America in this particular decade. Somewhere in your evening, someone will offer you a glass of ice water, and they will be quietly proud about it. Americans of the 1920s were famous, even to bewildered European visitors, for their absolute devotion to ice, and a grand hotel could produce it in astonishing quantities. Ice for your water, ice for your fruit, ice packed generously around anything that needed to stay cold. Refrigeration was still a growing luxury, so a hotel that could chill your drink on demand was showing off its modern muscle. You sip your frosty water and feel, just for a moment, like the future has finally arrived. The American love of ice genuinely baffled visitors from across the Atlantic. Travellers from Europe often found the local habit of dropping ice into everything and serving water so cold it made your teeth ache to be a peculiar and slightly excessive national quirk. To Americans, however, it was simply the correct way to enjoy a drink. Cold was good, colder was better, and a proper establishment demonstrated its quality partly by how effortlessly it could keep everything chilled. To meet this demand, hotels needed serious cold storage, and cold storage in this era was no small undertaking. Some relied on great blocks of ice, cut and stored and delivered in enormous quantities, kept in insulated rooms and ice boxes throughout the building. Others invested in the newer mechanical refrigeration that was steadily spreading through the decade, running their own plants to manufacture ice on the premises. Either way, keeping a large hotel cold was an ongoing operation involving considerable machinery, labour, and expense that guests happily ignored. For the guest, the payoff was simple delight. Your water arrived beaded with cold, your fruit came crisp and chilled, your dessert stayed firm. A hotel might even have iced dishes and cold treats that a home kitchen could never reliably produce, because keeping anything frozen at home was a daily battle against the melting world. The reliable, endless supply of cold was a luxury so quiet that you barely registered it, until you remembered how rare and difficult it was to achieve anywhere else. There is a deeper story hiding in that frosty glass, and it is the story of a country falling in love with cold comfort. This was the decade when mechanical refrigeration began transforming everyday life, when the humble icebox slowly started giving way to the electric refrigerator, when cold drinks and cold treats became a defining pleasure of American living. The Grand Hotel, always eager to showcase the newest marvels, put that cold on proud display. Ever noticed how a heap of ice still makes a drink feel somehow more generous? That instinct was being carefully trained right here. It was also, in its way, a small performance of abundance. Ice meant you had more than you strictly needed. It meant the establishment could afford to chill your water purely for your pleasure, on a whim, at any hour. In a world where so many comforts were rationed by season, weather, and effort, the endless cold of a grand hotel announced that here at least nature had been tamed. You wanted it cold, so it was cold, and no one thought twice about the enormous apparatus required to make it so. So you drink your impossibly cold water, feeling pampered by something as simple as temperature, and you set the glass down among your small forest of dinnerware. The evening, however, is not truly over, because there is still the great event ahead, the one that requires you to abandon your comfortable robe entirely and transform yourself into a properly presentable member of society. It is time, at last, to think about dressing for dinner. Now comes a small challenge that modern travellers rarely face. You cannot simply wander down to dinner in whatever you happen to be wearing. In a grand hotel, evening meant dressing for the occasion, which for many guests involved gowns, jewels, dinner jackets, and an alarming number of buttons. The clothing was formal, the expectations were high, and the silent judgment of your fellow diners was even higher. You check yourself in the mirror, adjust something that probably didn't need adjusting, and prepare to walk into a room full of strangers who will absolutely notice if a single detail of your outfit is wrong. The rules were real, and they were taken seriously. Dinner in the grand dining room was a formal affair, and turning up improperly dressed was not merely a faux pas. It could see you quietly turned away or seated in some distant, less desirable corner. Gentlemen were expected in formal evening wear, ladies in appropriate gowns, and the whole ensemble was assembled with care. This was not a place where you rolled in wearing your travelling clothes and expected a warm welcome. Dressing was the price of admission to the evening. For the men, this meant navigating the strict grammar of evening dress, a language of black jackets, crisp shirts, studs, and ties that carried subtle rules about exactly which occasion called for which degree of formality. A stiff collar could soar at your neck all evening. Small studs and cufflinks had to be fastened with fiddly precision. It was armour, essentially, uncomfortable and unforgiving, worn for the sole purpose of looking correct. Ever wrestled with a bow tie until you wanted to weep? Now imagine doing it nightly, without a mirror app to help. For the women, the stakes and the effort were even higher. This was the age of the flapper, of dropped waists, shorter hemlines, beading, and bold new styles that had scandalized the older generation not long before. A gown might shimmer with sequins, sway with fringe, and demand the right shoes, the right jewellery, and the right hair to complete it. Getting ready was an event in itself, a careful assembly of fabric and sparkle designed to make an entrance. And an entrance was very much the point. The whole ritual was really about being seen. The grand dining room was a stage, and your outfit was your costume for it. Other guests would notice what you wore, how you wore it, and whether it suggested taste and means or the opposite. Reputations were quietly formed and adjusted over the details of an evening ensemble. In a world before social feeds and photographs everywhere, this was how you presented yourself to society, in person, in real fabric, under real chandeliers, judged by real eyes. There was also a comforting side to all this fuss, at least for those who enjoyed it. Dressing for dinner marked a clear boundary between the day and the evening, a transformation from the practical business of travel into the pleasure of an occasion. Putting on your finest clothes was a way of honouring the moment, of participating in the shared performance, of belonging to the glittering world of the hotel rather than merely passing through it. When everyone dresses for dinner, dinner becomes something worth dressing for. So you fuss, you fasten, you smooth, and you check yourself one last time in the mirror, transformed from a weary traveller into a presentable member of the evening's cast. You take a breath, square your shoulders, and step out into the corridor, ready to descend. Because waiting below, glittering under its chandeliers and humming with quiet conversation, is the grand dining room, and it is watching the door for exactly the sort of entrance you're about to make. You descend into the dining room, and it is a spectacle all by itself. Tables draped in white cloth stretch beneath glittering chandeliers, waiters glide between them like well-dressed swans, and a low hum of polite conversation fills the air. A maitre d' greets you, sizes you up in a single practice glance, and leads you to your table with the seriousness of a man escorting royalty. You sit down, a napkin materializes across your lap as if by sorcery, and you slowly realize you're about to navigate a meal with far more rules, courses, and cutlery than you were entirely prepared for. The room itself was designed to impress before a single dish arrived. High ceilings, sparkling chandeliers, gleaming mirrors, and acres of crisp white linen created an atmosphere of hushed grandeur. Fresh flowers might grace each table. Soft music might drift from a corner. Every element was arranged to make dining feel less like eating and more like attending a refined event, one where the food was almost secondary to the setting and the company. You did not merely have dinner here, you dined. The maitre d' ruled this domain with quiet, absolute authority. It was his job to greet arrivals, judge them, and seat them according to an unspoken hierarchy that everyone understood and no one discussed. The favoured regulars and the visibly important received the best tables, positioned for both comfort and visibility. The unknown, the underdressed, or the merely unlucky might find themselves tucked away near the kitchen doors. A generous acquaintance with the maitre d', often encouraged by a discreetly folded bill, could work wonders on your seating. He remembered generosity, and he remembered its absence. The waiters moved through all this with impressive grace, a small choreographed army delivering plates, refilling glasses, and clearing courses in a smooth, near-silent ballet. Fine dining service was formal and precise, often following elaborate European traditions, with dishes presented and served according to careful ritual. A good waiter anticipated your needs before you voiced them, appearing at your elbow at exactly the right moment and vanishing again the instant he was no longer wanted. It was attentiveness raised to an art form. Then there was the matter of etiquette, an invisible web of rules governing everything from how you unfolded your napkin to how you signalled that you had finished. When to begin, how to hold your utensils, what to do with your hands, how to address the staff. All of it was governed by conventions that the initiated followed instinctively and the uninitiated fumbled through in quiet terror. The dining room was a test of manners as much as appetite, and everyone around you seemed to have studied for it. Ever sat down to a meal and immediately worried you were doing everything slightly wrong? The grand dining room bottled that feeling. For all its intimidation, the experience could be genuinely wonderful. To sit beneath those chandeliers, attended by skilled staff, surrounded by beautifully dressed people, eating carefully prepared food from fine china. was to feel briefly part of something elegant and grand. It was a taste of a refined life that many guests would never otherwise touch, purchased for the price of a meal and the willingness to mind one's manners. The room made ordinary people feel, for an hour or two, like characters in a far more glamorous story. So you settle into your seat, napkin arranged, water poured, the low murmur of the room washing pleasantly over you. A waiter appears, ready to guide you through the evening's offerings. And as your eyes drop to the table before you, you finally confront the full, gleaming, faintly terrifying reality of what fine dining in this era truly demands. An array of silverware so extensive it looks less like cutlery and more like a small armoury. Let's talk about the food, and more importantly, the frankly intimidating arsenal of silverware laid out before you. A formal dinner in a grand hotel could run to many separate courses, each with its own designated fork, spoon, or knife, arranged in a precise order that everyone around you seems to understand instinctively. Choose the wrong one, and no one will say a word, which is somehow far worse. The cuisine leaned heavily on rich French traditions, elaborate sauces and dishes with names you could not begin to pronounce. It was delicious, it was excessive, and it was quietly testing you the entire time. The sheer number of courses is the first thing that would stagger a modern diner. A grand formal dinner did not mean a plate of food and perhaps a dessert. It meant a long, stately procession of small dishes, soup, fish, meat, and more, each arriving in turn, each meant to be savoured, each accompanied by its own proper implement. The meal unfolded slowly over a considerable stretch of the evening, a marathon of measured indulgence rather than a quick refuel. You were not there to eat efficiently, you were there to linger. Which brings us to the cutlery, laid out in that famous intimidating row. The unspoken rule was elegantly simple and utterly merciless. You worked your way from the outside in, using the outermost utensils first and moving steadily inward with each new course. Follow the rule, and you sailed through smoothly. Fail to know it, and you were left guessing, watching your neighbours from the corner of your eye, hoping to mimic their choices before anyone noticed your hesitation. Ever tried to copy the person next to you because you had no idea which fork was correct? This is the ancient origin of that panic. The food itself drew heavily on French culinary tradition, which reigned as the pinnacle of fine dining. Rich sauces, elaborate preparations, and dishes with elegant French names dominated the finest menus, presented with an artfulness meant to please the eye as much as the palate. To the uninitiated, the menu could read like a foreign puzzle, a list of impressive words describing food you could not quite picture. Part of the experience was the pleasant uncertainty of ordering something you did not fully understand and hoping it turned out to be wonderful. There was a whole hidden grammar to the meal beyond the forks. Bread was handled a certain way. Soup was eaten in a particular direction. Signalling that you had finished a course involved placing your utensils just so, a silent message the attentive waiter would read and act upon. Every gesture carried meaning, and the truly polished diner performed them all without a flicker of conscious thought. For everyone else, dinner was a delicate exercise in not betraying your unfamiliarity, conducted under the gentle, ever-present possibility of a raised eyebrow. And yet, once you surrendered to it, there was real pleasure to be found. The slow pace encouraged conversation. The careful presentation made each course a small event. The abundance, excessive though it was, spoke of generosity and celebration. To dine this way was to treat eating as an occasion worthy of ritual, a philosophy that feels almost radical in an age of hurried meals and food eaten standing up. There was something to be said for a culture that believed dinner deserved several hours and a great deal of silverware. So you navigate your gleaming armoury, working bravely from the outside in, savouring courses you cannot quite name, and only occasionally glancing sideways to confirm your choices. It is delicious, exhausting, and quietly triumphant. And as the meal winds toward its close, you might find yourself craving something to drink alongside all this splendour, something with a little more character than ice water, which is where your evening takes a sudden, strange, and very 1920s turn. Now for the strangest twist of the whole era. You might wander the hotel looking for a lively bar, a place to enjoy a proper cocktail, and instead find nothing but a suspiciously empty room where the bar clearly used to be. Welcome to Prohibition, which from the year 1920 made the sale of alcohol illegal across the entire country. Almost overnight, the grand hotel bars that had once been the beating heart of social life were shuttered, dismantled, or awkwardly repurposed into something respectable. Officially, there was not a single drop of liquor to be found anywhere. Officially. To grasp how strange this was, you have to understand what the hotel bar had been before. For decades, the bar was a social and financial cornerstone of a grand hotel, a gathering place where men met to talk business, travellers unwound, and the establishment earned a very healthy share of its income. It was noisy, convivial, and central to the entire operation. And then, with the stroke of a law, it was simply forbidden. An entire pillar of hotel life was declared illegal from one day to the next. The financial blow was enormous. Hotels had leaned on the steady, profitable flow of the bar, and losing it legally meant losing a major source of revenue overnight. Many establishments scrambled to adapt, converting former bar rooms into cafes, lounges, tea rooms, or dining spaces, anything to make use of the room and recover some of the lost trade. The gleaming bar counters were torn out or hidden away. The bottles vanished from the shelves, and the whole space was awkwardly reinvented as something wholesome. It was a strange bit of theatre, a room pretending it had never served a drink in its life. For the guest, the effect was disorienting. You had arrived at the height of luxury, surrounded by every comfort imaginable, only to discover that one of the most basic pleasures of a grand hotel had officially ceased to exist. No convivial bar room, no bartender mixing your drink, no open, legal indulgence. It was as if the hotel had thrown a magnificent party and then quietly announced that the guest of honour had been outlawed. Ever shown up somewhere expecting a good time and hit an unexpected rule that spoiled the fun? The whole nation was living that moment. The law behind all this was sweeping and severe, banning the manufacture, sale and transport of intoxicating drink across the entire country. It was an experiment of astonishing ambition, an attempt to legislate an entire national habit out of existence. And like many grand experiments in human behaviour, it collided almost immediately with the stubborn reality of what people actually wanted, declaring that millions of thirsty adults would simply stop because a law said so, proved to be a touch optimistic. The grand hotels, caught in the middle, had to perform a careful public respectability. On the surface, they complied. The bars were gone, the menus listed no wines, and everything appeared perfectly lawful to any official who happened to glance around. The establishment presented a spotless face to the world, a model of obedience to the new order. It was all very proper, very correct, and very much a performance, because beneath that respectable surface, the reality of human thirst had not gone anywhere at all. So you stand in that oddly empty room where the bar used to be, contemplating a glittering world of luxury that has, on paper, gone completely dry. It seems at first like a genuine loss, a strange gap in the grand experience. But do not despair too quickly, because the alcohol did not truly vanish. It merely learned to be discreet, and a determined, knowledgeable guest in a grand hotel could still find exactly what they were looking for, provided they understood the quiet new rules of the game. Of course, the alcohol did not actually vanish. It simply went quiet and clever. Behind locked doors in private suites and through discreet arrangements with exactly the right member of staff, a determined guest could still find a drink if they knew precisely how to ask. Bellhops became suppliers, bootleggers made careful late-night deliveries, and hotels developed a delicate, unspoken art of looking the other way at just the right moment. The whole thing ran on winks, nods, and a shared understanding that the letter of the law and the reality of thirsty guests did not quite line up. It was rule-breaking with excellent manners. The great secret of Prohibition was that it did not stop people from drinking so much as change how they went about it. Instead of an open, legal bar, drinking moved into private rooms, hidden clubs, and the quiet corners of otherwise respectable establishments. The demand never disappeared. It simply drove the supply underground, where a whole shadow economy sprang up to meet it. Where there is thirst and money, there will always be someone willing to provide, law or no law. The Grand Hotel, with its constant flow of well-heeled guests, sat right in the middle of this thirsty new world. Enterprising staff, the bellhops especially, often knew exactly how to help a guest locate a bottle or a drink for the right consideration. A quiet word, a discreet exchange, and the impossible was arranged. These young men, already skilled at fetching and arranging and asking no questions, found that their talents were suddenly more valuable than ever. The tip for a successfully located drink could be very generous indeed. Then there was the practice of arriving prepared. Many guests simply brought their own supply, tucked into luggage or carried in a personal flask, and the hotel would quietly provide everything else. You could order what were politely called setups, the ice, the glasses, the mixers, all perfectly legal on their own, and then combine them with your own private stock in the comfort of your room. The hotel served no alcohol, technically. It merely served everything that happened to go with it. Ever noticed how a rule gets followed to the exact letter while its entire spirit is cheerfully ignored? This was that art, perfected. The whole arrangement depended on a delicate mutual discretion. The hotel maintained its respectable public face, the staff kept their knowing silence, and the guests conducted their indulgences behind closed doors. Everyone understood the rules of the quiet game. As long as nothing was flaunted, as long as appearances were maintained, the arrangement could continue smoothly. It was a kind of polite conspiracy, spanning management, staff, and guests alike, all pretending in public what none of them practiced in private. Beyond the hotel walls, this same thirst gave rise to the hidden clubs and secret drinking spots that defined the era's nightlife, tucked behind unmarked doors and known only to those in the know. The Grand Hotel often existed in quiet connection with this world, its staff aware of where a guest might go and how a guest might be helped. The line between the respectable establishment and the illicit one blurred pleasantly in the shadows, held together by cash, discretion, and a shared willingness to bend an unpopular rule. So you find, to your relief, that the dry and glittering hotel is not truly dry after all. With the right word to the right person, and perhaps a bottle of your own, the evening's pleasures remain very much available. It is luxury with a wink, indulgence conducted in a lowered voice, and once suitably refreshed, you may notice a warm swell of music drifting up from somewhere below, drawing you toward the dazzling heart of the hotel after dark. As the night deepens, follow the music toward the ballroom, the glittering heart of the hotel after dark. A live orchestra fills the vast space with sound. The dance floor gleams like a frozen lake, and couples in their absolute finest swirl beneath enormous chandeliers. This was the age of jazz, and the Grand Hotel Ballroom was where the modern world came to show itself off. The band plays, the room sparkles, and the energy is electric in a way that has nothing at all to do with the light bulbs. If you wanted to feel like you were standing at the very centre of the decade, this was the place to be. The ballroom was built for spectacle on a grand scale. Vast and high-ceilinged, ringed with mirrors and dripping with chandeliers, it could hold hundreds of guests and still feel airy and elegant. A sprung wooden floor gleamed underfoot, polished to perfection, and kept that way by staff who understood that a dance floor was only as good as its shine. The whole room was a stage designed for beautiful people to move across beautifully, and on a busy night it delivered exactly that. At the centre of it all was the music, and the music was changing fast. This was the decade when jazz swept into the mainstream and reshaped the sound of a generation, and the hotel orchestras rode that wave. A good dance band could fill the room with rhythm and energy, moving from smooth numbers to livelier tunes, keeping the floor in constant motion. The band leader became a figure of some celebrity, and the orchestra a genuine draw, the sort of thing that could make a particular hotel the place to be seen on a given evening. The dancing was the point, and the dance floor was where the era truly came alive. Couples moved through the popular steps of the day, some smooth and gliding, others bright and energetic, all of it performed in the glow of the chandeliers. There was a thrill to it, a sense of participating in something modern and exciting, of being young, or at least feeling young in a decade that seemed determined to have a good time. The floor was crowded, the music was warm, and the whole room seemed to pulse with a shared, giddy energy. The fashion on display was half the show. Ladies in shimmering gowns, beaded and fringed, catching the light with every turn. Gentlemen in sharp evening wear, hair slicked and polished. Jewellery sparkling, feathers swaying, fabrics gleaming. The whole crowd assembled into a moving tapestry of 1920s glamour. To stand at the edge of that floor and watch it swirl was to witness the decade performing its own legend in real time. Ever walked into a party so vibrant it felt like stepping into a movie? This was the room that the movies were later trying to recreate. The ballroom also served as the hotel's grand social engine. This was where celebrations were held, where society gathered, where debutantes were presented and anniversaries marked and evenings turned into occasions. The hotel that possessed the finest ballroom and the most sought-after orchestra held a genuine social power, drawing the fashionable and the wealthy through its doors. It was more than a room for dancing. It was a stage upon which the social life of the era performed itself night after glittering night. So you stand at the threshold, the music washing over you, the floor a swirl of light and motion and sound. It is intoxicating in every sense the law still allowed, and a few it did not. The band strikes up something bright and irresistible. Feet begin to move all around you, and you feel the pull of the floor itself. Because in this room, on this night, in this decade, there is really only one thing left to do, and that is to dance. You're pulled toward the dance floor, and here you will need to keep up because the 1920s introduced dances that were fast, playful and slightly scandalous to the older generation watching stiffly from the sidelines. The Charleston kicked and flailed, couples spun and dipped, and the whole floor moved with an energy that felt genuinely brand new. Feathers, beads, and slicked back hair caught the light with every turn. It was joyful, sweaty, and just a little bit rebellious, a physical expression of a generation deciding to enjoy itself as loudly as it possibly could. You do your best not to trip over anyone important. The Charleston was the dance that came to define the decade, and for good reason. Energetic, bouncy, and full of flying kicks and swinging arms, it was unlike the stately ballroom dances of earlier years. It demanded energy rather than mere grace, and it looked to disapproving elders, faintly ridiculous and possibly immoral, which of course only made the young love it more. To learn it was to join the modern age. To master it was to become the life of the floor. To attempt it without practice was to become a mild hazard to everyone nearby. It was far from the only new step. The decade brimmed with fresh dances, each with its own rhythm and character, some smooth and sliding, others wild and kicking. The dance floor became a place of experimentation and fun, where couples tried the latest steps and showed off what they had learned. Dance crazes swept through the culture with remarkable speed, spreading from ballrooms to living rooms and back again, each one a small badge of being current, of being in step with a fast-moving age. The older generation, predictably, was scandalized, and their disapproval was half the appeal. To elders raised on formal, dignified dancing, these new steps looked chaotic, undignified, and altogether too physical. The close holds, the energetic movements, the sheer exuberance of it all struck many as a symptom of a younger generation gone alarmingly loose. Naturally, the young found this reaction delightful. Ever enjoyed something a little bit more precisely because your elders clearly hated it? The dance floor of the 1920s ran on that exact fuel. The fashion was built for movement, and the movement showed off the fashion. Those shimmering beaded gowns with their fringe and their looser cut were made to swing and sparkle as their wearers danced, catching the light and amplifying every motion. Shorter hemlines meant freer movement. Bobbed hair stayed neat through the most vigorous steps. The whole modern look was in part a response to the modern dance, clothing designed for a generation that intended to move, and to be seen moving, with joyful abandon. Beneath the fun ran something a little deeper. The decade had emerged from years of hardship and upheaval, and there was in all this dancing a determination to embrace life, to celebrate, to seize pleasure and freedom while they could be had. The exuberance was real, and so was the appetite behind it. The dance floor was where a generation shook off the weight of the past and declared, with kicking feet and swinging arms, that it intended to enjoy the present as fully and loudly as possible. Joy, it turns out, is its own kind of statement. So you throw yourself into it, feet moving, heart pounding, the music carrying you along whether or not you truly know the steps. You laugh, you stumble, you spin, and for a few glorious minutes you're entirely part of the glittering, roaring heart of the age. Eventually the music slows, the night grows late, and thoughts of that comfortable turned-down bed begin to call. But the hotel, ever generous, has a few more comforts waiting to be discovered, beginning the moment you wake and wander down in search of a shave and a fresh start. Come morning, a gentleman guest might wander down to the hotel barbershop, a small palace of grooming all its own. Here you settle into a deep leather chair, lean back, and surrender your face to a barber armed with a straight razor, hot towels, and a truly endless supply of conversation. You could get a shave, a haircut, a trim, and a splash of something that smelled expensive, all without ever leaving the building. It was relaxing, it was social, and it was one more clever way the Grand Hotel tried to become an entire little world that you never once needed to step outside of. The star of the whole experience was the shave, and it was a genuine ritual. In an age before the safety razor had fully conquered every bathroom, many men still relied on the barber for a proper shave with a straight razor, a gleaming blade drawn across the throat by a stranger you were trusting a great deal. First came the hot towels, wrapped around your face to soften the beard, warm and faintly suffocating in the most pleasant way. Then the lather, worked up with a brush, and finally the blade itself, gliding across your skin with practiced, alarming confidence. You had to sit very still, of course. A straight razor at your throat is a powerful encouragement to remain calm and avoid sudden movements, sneezes, or strong opinions. The barber, for his part, wielded the blade with the easy skill of a man who did this hundreds of times a week and had long since stopped finding it dramatic. For the customer, though, there was always a small thrill in it, a moment of surrender, of placing your literal neck in another man's hands and trusting entirely in his steadiness. Ever handed control of something important to a professional and just hoped for the best? The morning shave was that feeling, applied to your jugular. The barbershop was also a deeply social space, a kind of clubhouse where men gathered, gossiped, and passed the time. Conversation flowed freely, from business to sport to the news of the day, and the barber himself was often a skilled talker, drawing out his customers and keeping the mood light. It was a place to relax, to be pampered a little, to sit in comfort while someone else did the work of making you presentable. For many men, the trip to the barber was as much about the atmosphere as the grooming. The finishing touches turned mere grooming into indulgence. A trim of the hair, perhaps some tonic worked through it, a splash of cologne or aftershave that announced your freshness to the world. Some barbershops offered more, a manicure from an attendant, a shoe shine performed while you sat, a whole suite of small services designed to send you back out into your day polished from head to toe. You went in rumpled and emerged gleaming, a new man ready to face the glittering hotel, and like everything else in this building, it was designed for your total convenience. You never had to seek out a barber in the city, never had to venture into unfamiliar streets in search of a decent shave. The hotel provided it right there. One more amenity in a place that seemed determined to supply every possible need under a single grand roof. The barbershop was a small, warm, mirrored world of its own, tucked into the larger world of the hotel. So you rise from the leather chair, face smooth, hair neat, smelling faintly of something costly, thoroughly refreshed and ready for the day. Your appearance has been handled, and while you sat there being groomed, you may not have realized that your clothing was being cared for too, quietly attended to by another invisible corner of the hotel's tireless machine. Your clothes, meanwhile, are being quietly cared for by people you may never actually see. Leave a suit out overnight, and it simply disappears, only to return cleaned, pressed, and looking somehow better than the day you bought it. Shoes left by the door are shined to a mirror finish while you sleep. The hotel valet service handled the wrinkled, the stained, and the travel-weary, ensuring you always looked crisp no matter how long or dusty your journey had been. In an age before wash and wear anything, this invisible labour was a real luxury, performed by staff whose entire purpose was to make you look effortlessly put together. To understand why this mattered, you must remember how much work clothing demanded in this era. Fabrics were natural and unforgiving, wrinkling easily, staining readily, and requiring careful cleaning and pressing to look their best. A long train journey left your finest suit rumpled and travel-worn. There were no easy home solutions, no tumbling machines that spat out fresh clothes, no fabrics that shrugged off wrinkles. Keeping a wardrobe presentable was genuine, ongoing labour, and the Grand Hotel simply took that labour off your hands entirely. The valet service was the heart of it. Leave your suit outside your door or ring for it to be collected, and it would be whisked away to be pressed and cleaned, returning crisp and immaculate. Trousers regained their sharp creases. Jackets lost their travel wrinkles. Whatever damage the journey had inflicted was quietly undone, so that you could descend to dinner or step out into the city looking as though you had just left your tailor. It was the sort of service that made a well-dressed traveller feel truly, effortlessly elegant. The shoe shine was a small marvel of the same kind. Leave your shoes outside the door at night, and by morning they would be there again, polished to a deep, gleaming shine, the dust and scuffs of travel buffed away. You did nothing. You slept. And somewhere in the quiet hours, a member of staff collected, polished and returned them, so that your first step into the day was taken on flawless leather. Ever wished your shoes would simply clean themselves overnight? The Grand Hotel granted that exact wish, using a human being instead of magic. Laundry service completed the picture. Shirts, linens and smaller items could be sent out to be washed and returned fresh and folded, sparing you the entire ordeal of doing laundry while travelling. In a time when washing clothes was a serious sweaty undertaking involving boiling water and hard scrubbing, handing it all over to the hotel was a profound convenience. You lived among clean, pressed, cared-for garments without lifting a finger toward their upkeep, which is a luxury even the modern traveller can appreciate. All of this depended on workers you rarely, if ever, glimpsed. The pressers, the cleaners, the shoe-shine staff, the laundry crews, all laboured behind the scenes to keep the guests looking their best. Their work was meant to be invisible, its results appearing as if by magic while its effort remained hidden. You saw only the pristine suit, the gleaming shoes, the fresh shirt, never the hands that made them so. It was one more layer of the great unseen machine that kept the whole gleaming illusion running. So you dress in your freshly pressed suit and mirror-bright shoes, looking sharper than you have any right to after days of travel, and you feel the quiet confidence that comes from being impeccably turned out. It is a small daily magic, performed by strangers, paid for in coin and, inevitably, in tips. Which brings us to the small folded bills changing hands all over this building and the delicate, relentless economy that governed them. Now let's discuss the small folded bills quietly changing hands all over the building, because in a grand hotel, tipping was practically a competitive sport. The doorman, the bellhop, the elevator operator, the waiter, the valet and the maid each expected a little something, and each one remembered exactly how generous you had been. Navigating this delicate web of expectation was an art form, and getting it wrong could earn you slower service and cooler smiles for the rest of your stay. Your wallet grows lighter with every friendly face, and somehow you're never entirely certain whether you tipped enough. The sheer number of people to tip was the first challenge. From the moment you arrived, you moved through a gauntlet of helpful hands, each one performing a service and each one quietly expecting acknowledgement. The doorman who opened your car door, the bellhop who carried your bags, the elevator operator who lifted you skyward, the waiter, the valet, the maid, the barber, the shoe shine, on and on. Every interaction carried the small question of whether, when, and how much to tip, a running calculation that never quite ended. Ever done rapid mental arithmetic about a stranger's expectations while trying to look relaxed? A grand hotel was that arithmetic all day long. The amounts mattered, and so did the timing and the manner. A tip pressed too obviously into a palm looked crude. A tip too small looked stingy. A tip forgotten entirely could mark you, quietly and permanently, as a difficult guest. The smooth guest learned to fold the bill discreetly, to pass it with a light touch and a word of thanks, to make the whole transaction feel like a gracious afterthought rather than a payment. It was a skill, and those who lacked it announced their inexperience with every fumbling exchange. For the staff, tips were not a pleasant bonus but a fundamental part of the arrangement. Many hotel workers earned modest official wages, with the understanding that tips would make up a significant share of their income. This meant that the quality of service you received could be shaped, subtly but surely, by your reputation for generosity. A guest known to tip well found doors opening a little faster, requests met a little more eagerly, smiles arriving a little warmer. The economy of gratitude ran quietly beneath the whole guest experience, and everyone understood the rules. Visitors from abroad often found the whole system baffling and a little relentless. The American enthusiasm for tipping struck many foreign travellers as excessive, a constant small drain on the wallet and a source of perpetual low-grade anxiety about whether one had done it correctly. But it was woven so deeply into the fabric of service that there was no opting out. To move through a grand hotel was to participate in the ritual, whether you understood it or not, whether you enjoyed it or not. There was a certain psychology to it that the more cynical guests understood well. A generous tipper was, in effect, purchasing not just service but goodwill, buying a warmer welcome and smoother treatment for the duration of their stay. The staff remembered. The reputation travelled ahead of you through the building. In a place run by many hands, being known as a good tipper was a kind of quiet currency all its own, spendable in comfort and convenience. So you move through your day dispensing small folded bills to a parade of helpful faces, your wallet steadily thinning, your uncertainty steadily growing. It is the price of being cared for by so many, the constant quiet cost hidden beneath the gleaming service. And it is worth pausing to consider just how many hands that service truly required, including a great many you were never meant to see at all. For every polished surface you admire, there is a hidden world of hard labour keeping it that way. Behind the grand facade, an enormous staff worked long hours in kitchens, laundries, boiler rooms and back corridors you would never once glimpse. Cooks, dishwashers, chambermaids, porters, engineers and clerks kept the entire machine running smoothly and silently. The magic of the guest experience depended completely on these people remaining invisible, appearing only when needed and vanishing the moment they were not. The hotel ran like a great ocean liner, and most of its crew worked far below the waterline. The scale of the operation was staggering. A large grand hotel was less a building than a small self-contained town, employing hundreds of workers across dozens of trades to keep everything functioning. There were the kitchens, vast and hot and frantic, turning out meal after meal for the dining rooms and room service. There were the laundries churning through mountains of sheets and towels and tablecloths. There were the engineers tending the boilers and machinery, the porters hauling supplies, the maids cleaning endless rooms. Behind every effortless comfort stood a chain of human effort. The work was hard and the hours were long. Many staff laboured through demanding shifts, on their feet for most of the day, performing physical work that would exhaust anyone. Chambermaids cleaned room after room to exacting standards. Kitchen staff endured the heat and pressure of a busy service. The pay for most was modest, supplemented by tips for those in guest-facing roles and by little else for those hidden in the back. It was a life of steady, grinding labour in service of other people's leisure. There was a strict hierarchy to it all, a whole ranked order of positions and status among the staff. At the top stood the manager and senior figures who oversaw the operation. Below them ran layers of supervisors, department heads, and specialists, down through the ranks of the ordinary workers who did the bulk of the physical labour. Guest-facing roles that earned tips were generally more coveted than the hidden back of housework. Everyone knew their place in the order, and advancement where it was possible was earned slowly. Perhaps the most striking feature of the whole arrangement was its deliberate invisibility. The entire design of a grand hotel worked to keep the labour out of sight, so that the guest experienced only the seamless result. Service corridors and back stairways allowed staff to move through the building without crossing the guest's path. Work was timed to happen when guests were absent, like the turn-down performed while you dined. The goal was for comfort to appear effortless, as though the hotel simply ran itself, when in truth it ran on the constant hidden work of hundreds. It is worth pausing on that contrast because it defines the whole enterprise. The dazzling luxury of the grand hotel, the marble and the chandeliers and the endless attentive service, rested entirely on the labour of people who were paid modestly, worked hard, and were meant never to be noticed. The gleaming world upstairs existed because of the sweating world below. Every comfort you enjoyed was, in the end, someone's job, and often a difficult one, performed out of sight so that you need never think about it. So the great machine hums on around you, its hundreds of hidden hands keeping your gleaming world in perfect order, most of them faces you will never see. And among the faces you do see, though you may not recognize him for what he is, moves one particular figure whose entire purpose is to watch, quietly and constantly, everything that happens in the building. Not everyone wandering the halls of a grand hotel was a paying guest, and the management knew it perfectly well. Enter the house detective, a quietly watchful figure whose whole job was to keep an eye on everything and everyone. He looked for thieves, con artists, unregistered visitors sneaking upstairs, and any behaviour that might embarrass the establishment. Dressed like an ordinary guest, he blended seamlessly into the lobby, observing far more than he ever let on. In a building packed with strangers, cash and jewellery, someone had to keep quiet order, and he did it with a calm, unblinking attention you would never notice unless he wanted you to. The need for such a figure was real. A grand hotel gathered together under one roof, a large number of strangers, a great deal of valuable property and considerable sums of money. Guests carried jewellery, cash and fine possessions. The constant flow of people through the public spaces made it easy for the wrong sort to slip in unnoticed. Where wealth and strangers mingle so freely, opportunity for trouble follows, and the hotel needed someone whose job was to watch for it before it became a scandal. His great skill was blending in. The house detective did not stride about in a uniform announcing his purpose. He dressed and carried himself like any other guest, lounging in the lobby with a newspaper, drifting through the public rooms, present everywhere and conspicuous nowhere. This invisibility was his most valuable tool, allowing him to observe naturally, to notice the person who lingered too long or moved too purposefully, without ever alerting them to the fact that they were being watched. He was hiding in plain sight, part of the scenery. He watched for a whole catalogue of troubles. Thieves who preyed on wealthy guests and unattended valuables. Con artists working their schemes on the trusting and the vulnerable. Uninvited visitors trying to slip upstairs to rooms that were not theirs. And more generally, any behaviour that threatened the good order and reputation of the establishment. His attention swept constantly across the flow of people, sorting the ordinary from the suspicious with the practised eye of a man who had seen every trick a hotel could attract. When trouble did arise, discretion was everything. The last thing a grand hotel wanted was a loud, public scene that alarmed its distinguished guests and stained its reputation. So the house detective handled problems quietly, drawing a suspicious individual aside, resolving a matter in a back office, removing a troublemaker without fuss. The goal was always to protect both the guests and the hotel's image, to keep the gleaming surface of the establishment untroubled by the messier realities it inevitably encountered. Ever noticed how the smoothest operations are the ones where you never see the problems being solved? That was his entire art. He also served quietly as a kind of moral guardian of the premises, alert to conduct that might embarrass the establishment. In an age with its own firm ideas about propriety, and in a building where the private and the public brushed constantly against one another, the detective kept a watchful eye on the hotel's respectability as well as its safety. His was a job of judgment as much as vigilance, deciding what mattered, what could be ignored, and what had to be quietly addressed. So he sits in the lobby, unremarkable and unnoticed, watching the whole glittering world of the hotel flow past with an attention no guest ever suspects. He is the quiet keeper of order beneath the luxury, the unseen eye that helps the gleaming machine run without scandal. And yet, for all the hotel watched over those inside its walls, there remains a harder truth about who was permitted to pass through its doors in the first place. For all their glamour, the grand hotels of the 1920s reflected the harsh divisions of their time. Access to these gilded spaces was shaped heavily by race, class, and background, and many Americans were barred from staying as guests at all, permitted inside only as workers in uniform. Segregation ran deep, and the very same buildings that dazzled some visitors quietly and firmly excluded others. It is an uncomfortable truth sitting beneath all the sparkle, and it deserves to be remembered honestly. The luxury on display was very real, but so was the injustice of who was actually allowed to enjoy it. In this era, particularly though not only in the South, laws and customs enforced a rigid separation by race, and the grand hotels were part of that system. Black Americans were, in most such establishments, not admitted as guests. The comforts described throughout this story, the fine rooms, the elegant dining, the attentive service, were reserved for white patrons. For countless Americans, the doors of these hotels simply did not open, no matter their means, their standing, or their need for a place to rest. Yet these same establishments depended heavily on the labour of the very people they refused to serve. Black workers filled many of the roles that kept the hotels running, labouring as porters, cooks, maids, waiters, and attendants, performing the essential work behind the gleaming facade. They could enter to clean the rooms, but not to sleep in them, to serve the meals, but not to be served, to make the luxury possible while being denied any share of it. This contradiction sat at the very heart of the Grand Hotel, and it should not be smoothed over. For a black traveller in this period, the difficulty of finding lodging was a serious and constant hardship. Journeys had to be planned with great care around the question of where one might safely and lawfully stay, since so many establishments were closed to them. This burden shaped travel itself, turning what was a simple matter for some into a stressful, sometimes dangerous undertaking for others. The freedom to move through the country and rest along the way was not shared equally, and the grand hotels were among the places that made that inequality plain. Race was not the only line of division. Class and background mattered a great deal as well, and the hotels sorted their patrons in quieter ways too, through the judgment of the front desk, the assignment of rooms, and the subtle gradations of welcome extended to different kinds of guests. Certain groups faced exclusion or suspicion based on their origins or their perceived standing. The Grand Hotel presented itself as a place of universal elegance, but in truth its welcome was carefully bounded, extended fully only to those the era deemed acceptable. It is important to hold both of these truths together. The grand hotels of the 1920s were genuinely remarkable places, full of beauty, comfort, and craft, and they represented real achievements of hospitality and design. They were also instruments of exclusion, spaces where the prejudices of their time were built into the very rules of who could enter and how. To remember them honestly means acknowledging the injustice alongside the glamour, and recognizing the many people who were shut out of a world their own labour helped to build. The Gilded Age of the Grand Hotel, then, was never gilded for everyone. Its splendour belonged to some and was withheld from others, according to lines drawn by the society that created it. Understanding these places fully means keeping that reality in view, even as we marvel at what they were, and it is against that fuller, more honest backdrop that the rest of the hotel story, including its very real dangers, deserves to be told. All of this modern wonder arrived with modern dangers, and hotel fires were a genuine fear of the age. Buildings packed with people, wooden furnishings, heavy drapes, and brand new electrical wiring were not always the safest possible combination. Iron fire escapes clung to the outer walls, staff drilled quietly for emergencies, and guests occasionally studied the exits a little more carefully than they let on. The very same electricity that lit your room so beautifully could, if carelessly installed, cause serious trouble. Progress arrived remarkably quickly in the 1920s, sometimes a good deal faster than safety could keep up with it. Fire was the great terror of large buildings in this era, and for good reason. A grand hotel gathered hundreds of people, often across many floors, into a structure filled with flammable materials. Wooden furniture, thick curtains, carpets and linens all offered fuel. A blaze that took hold could spread quickly and prove difficult to escape, particularly for guests on the upper floors. The very grandeur of these buildings, their height and their rich furnishings, made the danger of fire all the more serious. The new electricity that guests marvelled at carried its own quiet risk. Electrical wiring was still a relatively young technology, and installation standards varied. Faulty or overloaded wiring could overheat and spark, and in a building full of flammable material, a small electrical fault could become a large problem. The same modern marvel that banished the open flame of candles and gas lamps introduced a new hazard of its own, hidden inside the walls where no one could see it. Ever felt uneasy about wiring you could not inspect? The 1920s lived that unease on a grand scale. To guard against disaster, hotels took what precautions the era offered. Fire escapes, those iron stairways bolted to the outer walls, provided a route down from the upper floors, and guests were meant to know where they were. Staff were often organised and drilled to respond to emergencies, to help evacuate guests and combat a blaze in its early stages. Some buildings incorporated newer fireproofing techniques and materials as construction methods improved. The threat was taken seriously, even if the means of addressing it were still developing. For the guest, the danger was usually a background worry rather than a constant fear, but a sensible traveller kept it in mind. Noting the location of the fire escape, being aware of the exits, thinking for a moment about how one would leave in an emergency. These were reasonable precautions in an age when a hotel fire was a real and recurring event. Most stays passed without incident, of course, but the possibility lingered, a small shadow beneath the comfort, a reminder that all this modern splendour was not without its perils. More broadly, the fire hazard was part of a larger truth about the decade. Progress was racing ahead, and safety was struggling to keep pace. New technologies, new materials, and new ways of building and living were transforming daily life at remarkable speed, often before their risks were fully understood or their dangers properly managed. The grand hotel, packed with the newest marvels, embodied both the thrill and the hazard of that rapid change. To live amid such progress was to enjoy comforts unknown to earlier generations, and to accept, knowingly or not, a new set of risks along with them. So you note the fire escape at the end of the hall, perhaps with a passing flicker of unease, and then return to enjoying the countless comforts around you. The danger is real, but rarely realised, a quiet cost of living in the modern world. And that modern world, for all its risks, also offered remarkable new ways to stay connected to the life you had left behind, all managed from the busy desk in the lobby. Long before instant messages, staying in touch from a grand hotel was its own small operation. At the front desk you could send and collect letters, dispatch a telegram racing across the country in crisp clipped words, and pick up messages left for you by callers and visitors. A telegraph desk handled the urgent news, and the daily arrival of the mail was treated as a small event. For travelling businessmen and society figures alike, the hotel served as a temporary headquarters, a place where the wider world could reach you and you could reach it right back, all smoothly managed by a courteous and endlessly patient staff. The mail was the backbone of it all. In an age when letters carried the bulk of personal and business communication, the arrival and dispatch of mail was a matter of real importance. The hotel handled it for you, receiving letters addressed to guests and sending off the correspondence you wished to post. Checking whether anything had arrived for you was a small daily ritual, a moment of anticipation at the front desk. A letter from home, a note from a business associate, an invitation to some event in the city, all of it flowed through the hotel's capable hands. For messages that could not wait, there was the telegram, the fastest communication the era offered. Through the telegraph, words could be sent racing across great distances in a matter of hours, arriving far sooner than any letter could travel. The cost was charged by the word, which is precisely why telegrams were written in that famous clipped economical style, every unnecessary word ruthlessly trimmed to save expense. The hotel could arrange to send your telegram and deliver those that arrived for you, connecting you to distant cities with a speed that still felt slightly miraculous. Ever tried to say something important in as few words as possible to save money? The telegram invented that discipline. Then there were the messages left in person, an essential part of a world without pocket telephones. When someone called at the hotel to see you and found you out, or wished to leave word, they left a message at the desk, which the staff carefully recorded and passed along on your return. Your key, remember, was usually kept at the desk while you were out, so the staff always knew whether you were in, and messages could be handed to you along with your key. It was a manual human system of keeping people connected, run entirely on paper, memory and diligence. All of this made the Grand Hotel a genuine hub of communication, especially for those travelling on business. A businessman could effectively run his affairs from the hotel, receiving mail and telegrams, sending replies, taking messages, and using his room and the front desk as a temporary base of operations. The hotel became his address, his office, and his message centre all at once, allowing him to remain fully engaged with the wider world even far from home. In a mobile age, this was an enormous practical value beyond mere comfort. Behind all these services stood the ever-courteous staff, quietly managing the constant flow of correspondence and communication, sorting the mail, recording the messages, arranging the telegrams, handing everything to the right guest at the right moment. It was detailed work requiring care and reliability. A misplaced letter or a forgotten message could cause real trouble, so the staff attended to it with the same diligence they brought to every other duty. The guests simply enjoyed the seamless result, the sense of being reachable and connected wherever they roamed. So you collect your letters, dispatch your clipped little telegram, and gather the messages left in your absence, fully in touch with a world you have temporarily left behind. The hotel has kept you connected, as it has kept you fed, warmed, groomed, and comfortable. But every stay must eventually end, and ending it means one final visit to the front desk, where the true cost of all this attentive care is at last laid neatly before you. Eventually, every stay must come to an end, and that means returning to the front desk to settle your account. The clerk produces a neatly itemized bill, and here is where the true cost of all that lovely fussing finally becomes clear. The room, the meals, the telephone calls, the room service, the pressing, and every small charge you had happily forgotten all about. You pay, perhaps with a slight wince, hand over one final round of tips, and gather your carefully returned luggage. The doorman hails your taxi, wishes you a safe journey, and just like that, your brief gilded life of luxury is quietly over. The bill itself was a careful record of your entire stay, and it could hold a few surprises. Every service you had enjoyed, often signing for it in the moment without much thought, had been quietly noted and added to your account. The room, of course, but also each meal charged to your bill, each telephone call placed through the operator, each item of clothing pressed, each little indulgence summoned by ringing the desk. Presented all together at the end, the total could be a sobering reminder of just how much fussing you had accepted. Ever added up a string of small comforts and been startled by the sum? Checking out delivered that reckoning in full. The room clerk who handled your departure did so with the same smooth courtesy that had greeted your arrival. He presented the bill, explained any charges if asked, accepted your payment, and managed the whole transaction with practiced ease. There was an art to settling an account graciously, to reviewing the charges without seeming suspicious, to paying without visible dismay. The clerk had seen every reaction, from the airy indifference of the truly wealthy to the careful arithmetic of those for whom the stay had been a real extravagance. Then came the final round of tips, one last pass through the familiar ritual of gratitude. The staff who had served you throughout your stay might reasonably expect a parting acknowledgement, and the departing guest dispensed these final coins as the last act of the whole tipping economy. The maid who had kept your room, the bellhop who now retrieved your luggage, the doorman waiting at the curb, each received their due, and your wallet performed its final act of thinning before you escaped into the wider world. Your luggage, meanwhile, reappeared as smoothly as it had vanished on arrival. The bellhop collected your bags, brought them down, and loaded them into your waiting transport, sparing you once again the indignity of carrying your own belongings. The great steamer trunk, the suitcases, the hat boxes, all were gathered and handled by practiced hands. You simply stood by, freshly pressed and freshly barbered, watching your possessions be managed for you one final time. And then, quite suddenly, it was over. The doorman opened your taxi door, tipped his cap, and wished you a pleasant journey, and you rolled out from beneath the grand canopy back into ordinary life. The marble, the chandeliers, the attentive service, the endless small comforts, all of it fell away behind you as the hotel turned its attention to the next arriving guest. Your brief membership in that glittering little kingdom had expired, paid in full and gently concluded, so you settle back into your taxi, lighter in the wallet and heavier in memory, carrying with you the strange sweet aftertaste of a few days spent being thoroughly, expensively cared for. It was luxury on loan, a borrowed taste of a rarefied world now behind you, and it is worth pausing as your hotel shrinks into the distance to consider what became of these gilded palaces and how quickly the golden age that built them would begin to fade. The grand hotels of the 1920s represented the very peak of a certain kind of American glamour, a world of marble, jazz, ice water, and endless attentive service. But this golden age was never going to last forever. The stock market crash at the close of the decade, followed by the long grinding grip of the Great Depression, would slowly empty the ballrooms and quiet the lobbies across the whole country. The staff shrank, the parties faded, and the extravagance that once seemed limitless became a memory. Yet for one shining decade, these hotels were dazzling little kingdoms, and tonight you got to live inside one. The 1920s had been a decade of remarkable prosperity for many, a time when money seemed to flow freely and confidence ran high. The grand hotels were both a product and a symbol of that mood, monuments to abundance built for a society that felt for a while that the good times would simply continue. Their glittering ballrooms and lavish service embody the optimism of the age, the sense that comfort and pleasure and elegance were the natural rewards of a booming modern world. They were the decade made solid in marble and chandelier and polished brass. Then, at the very end of the decade, the crash came, and with it the long descent into the Great Depression. The economic collapse that followed was severe and lasting, wiping out fortunes, closing businesses, and throwing vast numbers of people out of work. The free-flowing money that had filled the grand hotels dried up. The prosperous guests who had crowded the dining rooms and ballrooms could no longer afford such extravagance, or no longer felt it was seemly, and the great palaces of luxury began to feel the chill of harder times. The effect on the hotels was profound. Ballrooms that had once roared with music and dancing fell quiet. Dining rooms that had bustled saw empty tables. The vast staffs that had made the seamless luxury possible were cut back as revenues fell. The whole elaborate machinery of pampering, built for an age of confident spending, strained and shrank in an age of scarcity and worry. The extravagance that had defined the decade came to seem like a relic of a vanished mood, a golden bubble that had finally inevitably burst. Many of the grand hotels endured, of course, adapting and surviving into later years, some remaining famous to this day. But the particular world they had embodied, that specific moment of jazz-age glamour and carefree abundance, did not return in quite the same form. The decade that had built them gave way to leaner, harder years, and the culture itself changed. The image of the Grand Hotel in its 1920s glory became a kind of nostalgia, a picture of a lost age of elegance that later generations would look back on with fascination and longing. And yet, for that one shining decade, these places truly were extraordinary. They were dazzling little kingdoms where an ordinary traveller could step, however briefly, into a life of marble and music and endless care. They gathered the newest marvels of the age, the electric light, the running hot water, the telephone, the effortless heat, and wrapped them in beauty and service and ceremony. They were flawed, exclusive, and built on hidden labour, but they were also genuinely magnificent, a high watermark of a certain American dream of comfort and grandeur. So there you have it, the strange and glittering reality of staying in a grand hotel in 1920s America. From the doorman at the curb to the bill at the desk, from the private bath to the vanished bar, from the roaring ballroom to the quiet golden fade. You have wandered its marble halls, sampled its comforts, and glimpsed the hidden world that made them possible. Tonight, you got to live inside that vanished kingdom, if only in imagination, before drifting gently back to the comforts of your own time. And so our night at the Grand Hotel comes gently to a close. What a strange and glittering world it was. You arrived weary and dusty, and within minutes you were swept up into a life of marble floors and soft velvet chairs, of doormen in gold braid and bellhops in little round hats, of hot baths summoned from thin air and light that appeared at the flick of a switch. You dressed for dinner, navigated a battlefield of forks, watched the bar quietly vanish and the liquor just as quietly reappear, and danced beneath enormous chandeliers until the small hours. For a few shining days, you lived like someone far grander than yourself, fussed over by more hands than you could count. But behind all that dazzle moved a small army of tired, hard-working people, labouring in kitchens and laundries and boiler rooms so that you never had to lift a finger. And beyond the gilded doors stood many who were never allowed inside at all. The splendour was real, and so was the cost of it, and so was the deep unfairness of who got to enjoy it. It is worth remembering both. Here is the quiet wonder of it. Nearly every marvel that once left those guests breathless, the hot running water, the electric light, the warmth without a fire, the voice carried across the city, all of it waits for you right now, in your own home, treated as nothing special at all. You're surrounded by luxuries a 1920s millionaire would have envied. So tonight, as you sink into your own soft bed, warm and clean and cared for, let the marble halls fade gently away. Rest easy, sleep well, and drift off in comfort no grand hotel could ever quite match.